Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Stahl. I am the University Archivist at University of California, Santa Barbara. And I'll be your host here today, I guess. My main task is just to introduce the speakers and throw in the occasional dad joke, I guess. So we have three presentations for you today on electronic records. Our one on digital archiving, one on digital records management, and then finally our third presentation will be on privacy. And our first speaker is Cristina Velasquez Fiedler. Cristina is the digital archivist at the University of California, Berkeley, the Bancroft Library. She manages the maintenance and stewardship of foreign digital archival collections. She received her BA in English at Humboldt State University in 2005, her MLIS from San Jose State University in 2010, and has been working in the archive profession for over 10 years. She had previous work experience as a software implementation consultant, archived assistant at the California Academy of Sciences, and as the archivist at the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology at UC Berkeley. And her presentation is about acquiring born digital collections in a remote environment. It requires new approaches and system dependencies. In this presentation, Cristina will discuss steps taken by the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley to acquire born digital collection remotely during the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent lockdown. So I will turn it over to Cristina and share her screen.
Yeah, thanks for that wonderful introduction, Matt. I'm going to do the whole sharing screen thing. If you give me 1 second here. All right. Can I get a panelist to give me a thumbs up on my sharing screen? Thank you. Yeah, thanks again for that lovely introduction. Yeah, I'm Cristina Velasquez Fiedler. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about born digital collections and electronic records and how the pandemic kind of changed our practices, I think, in more efficient ways. I hope my talk sheds some light on how digital archivists approach digital preservation and how the pandemic adjusted our workflows. So just to give you a very quick overview of our collections, the Bancroft Library is one of the largest special collection libraries in the West. Its collecting scope includes everything from Western Americana, rare books and literary manuscripts, Latin Americana, pictorial collections, and of course, university records, all of which can be created electronically. So this is kind of a breakdown of the different storage devices that our collections come in. You can imagine the kind of environment that we have that would support this kind of diversity in media. We have a lot of 3.5-inch floppy disks. That's that giant green bar, because they only hold 1.44 megabytes. So if you're a content creator during the time of that media, you're going to need a lot of those disks. So it's fun to work with this variety of media. We're over 7,000 individual disks or it's really everything from 5.25-inch floppy disks to high capacity external hard drives. Every once in a while, we would get cloud services like a Dropbox link or a Google Drive link, but before the pandemic, that wasn't really even on this graph. That has definitely ticked up. And so just to give you some idea of where I fit into this, I started in December of 2019 at the Bancroft, walking into that really diverse collection of born digital media. And I was tasked with updating the Born Digital program. There was a gap of some years between me and my predecessor. So I was really focused on taking what was already an excellent foundation and updating it to current standards. And my plans went a little haywire, I think, like everyone else's. We went into lockdown in mid-March, and I no longer had access to that physical media. Everything came to like a screeching halt. But that really only lasted for so long. I did have these grand visions of what I was going to accomplish that year, but clearly I had to readjust my expectations. And I think, like a lot of people, I polished some documentation and rethought workflows during that time. But I think that this experience really did change things for the better. In rethinking workflows for a variety of activities involving stewarding born digital collections, we really had to think outside the box during that time. And one of the things that we had to think about was how to transfer digital records and collection materials to the Bancroft remotely, no longer using those storage devices that we so heavily relied on before. One of the first groups to reach out to me and to the Bancroft was the Academic Senate. The Academic Senate at UC Berkeley has been depositing their records at the Bancroft dating back to the 1800s. Historically, they were in bound volumes. Currently, there are 30 committees, and some of them have smaller agenda packets. Some of them have up to 200 pages. All of their materials are created natively in electronic format now. And so when they reached out to us, they updated me on that history. Our university archivist, Kathy Neal, was up to speed on that already. She's wonderful and was a great partner in this project. But the Academic Senate historically had been creating a lot of their records electronically and had been printing them out and putting them in binders to deposit at the Bancroft. And they would do that every 5 years. And it would take almost a year to accomplish that. And so when they reached out to us during the pandemic, they said, you know, we're due to deposit our records and we don't want to do this anymore. And I thought, well, I don't want you to do this anymore. I don't think it makes sense. Like, we have a Born Digital program. You should be able to deposit your records here. And we can do that in a safe, secure way. So I was then tasked to really think about a solution to remotely transfer these university electronic records. And it isn't just a matter of copying and pasting into a different university server. That's not how digital preservation works. To do this with integrity and to preserve the metadata for the files, I needed something that could create a manifest. You might hear that word thrown around. A manifest is just a file or a set of files containing metadata for a group of files. It creates almost like a package. And I use our manifest to validate and confirm that the files that are given to me match the files as I move them across different systems in their workflow for digital preservation. It's important to have that data so that you protect the integrity of your files. It's just a basic form of digital preservation. So in thinking about all of these standards and how to do this, I developed some criteria of what I needed in order to do this. How was I going to take these Academic Senate records that were on this server that I couldn't really access from my house during the lockdown, and how to do it in a secure way? So I knew that it needed to conform to Bagot profiles. This is just a standard for how these files are packaged. There were certain metadata that I needed to preserve, including the date created. I needed to be able to validate these packages as I did move them across different systems. And it needed to have a user interface that the end user, the Academic Senate, could use. I didn't want to use some command line tool that was going to be clunky and that wasn't going to be accessible to any kind of user. So that was be free. I wasn't in a position where I was going to be able to buy a tool. So it needed to be open sourced and regularly maintained and funded. Those were all part of my criteria. So I turned to the community-owned digital preservation tool registry. Part of working with Born Digital Collections means that you are working with an evolving set of software tools. Some of these tools come and go, and you can imagine with all that media that we normally work with that you're going to need really an ecosystem of tools. And Copter is a great community-owned site that stays up to date on some of these tools and organizes them according to function, to format. They have a really great site and heavily used by the community. So you can imagine the spreadsheet that I had. It was all of these tools met with my criteria and how what I thought and what the Academic Senate thought would be the best way to transfer their tools. And we narrowed it down to DART, which is the Digital Archivist Resource Tool. This is out of the Academic Preservation Trust, or AP Trust. A lot of folks in this community used Bagger before, and Bagger is a wonderful tool out of the Library of Congress. And at the time, it hadn't been updated in several years. And so I didn't feel it was really the right fit. It recently received some funding, so we're hoping that that will continue to grow. But DART was something that was regularly maintained. Their programmer, Andrew Diamond, is very accessible and had been a wonderful partner when I was reaching out to get more information for DART. It's very intuitive. It's just a drag and drop interface. So I thought, wow, if Academic Senate, if the folks there can download DART, they can package their files. And then that package, it wraps it in a tarball. We could put it in box.com where I could retrieve it. And it kind of fit all of those little checkboxes that I had. It supports the Bagot profiles. It was free. It has a great community, and it runs on all the operating systems that we needed it to, because the Academic Senate was primarily using Mac OS. So this seemed like a great solution. So I created a plan and worked with the Academic Senate to work on this collaboratively. They installed DART, and I trained them how to use it over Zoom. It was a great way to kind of get to know folks on the campus, and they already were using box.com for other tools, so that they have an institutional account there. And then I could take those packages and update ArchivesSpace, which is our information management system for our collections. And I could create surrogate access files for them to use and put it on our preservation server. So this was just kind of the approach that we took for dealing with those records. So one thing that I also learned as I went through this was that we had another university collection that came through, and that was Lockley University. So this was when students created the Berkeley campus in Minecraft. And I was tasked with preserving that world, and that could be a talk in and of itself. I don't have time for it, but through that project, I learned that I could use the desktop apps for these cloud systems. So the Blockley students were organizing their project in Google Drive, and using the Google Drive desktop app, I could then use DART to package these files remotely so that they wouldn't even have to download DART. I wouldn't have to train them to use it. I could remotely do this from my home. And subsequently, I could do that for the Academic Senate. So that is where we are now. I've totally eliminated that entire step. And I think as these tools continue to evolve, that this kind of acquisition of records, of Born Digital Collections will become, I think, increasingly hands-free for our end users, and hopefully seamless. So that's just a little background of how we came to remotely capture Academic Senate records and our Blockley University records. And I look forward to your questions at the end of the So our other co-presenters are going to speak and we'll take questions at the very end. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it off to, I think, Eric.
Let's see. Actually, we're gonna, oh, let's see. Yeah. Where are we seeing? All right. Well, thank you, Christina. Yeah, we will be handing it off to Eric and Jordan, but first I got to give their little introduction. Let's see, Eric and Jordan are both from UT Merced. Eric Kalman is the Director of Records Management and Information Practices at UT Merced. In his current role, he's responsible for the operational oversight and development of the records management, information practices, and campus privacy programs. Prior to joining UT Merced, Eric worked for California State Parks, focusing on records management, archived, and digital transformation initiative. Eric holds a master's degree in archives and records administration from San Jose State University. Jordan Thaw is a California Central Valley native and proud UC Merced alumna, graduating with a Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences in May 2015. She began working at UC Merced in August 2012 as a student assistant in the Physical Planning, Design, and Construction Department, where she helped build their analog and digital archives. In Jordan's current role as a record analyst in the Office of Legal Affairs, her major responsibilities include consulting with users about record management best practices and responding to CIPRA and FERPA requests. And yes, I will hand it over to them. You may share your screen.
All right, good morning, everyone. Let me do my screen share here. All right, everyone can see that okay? Matt, you see it all right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for joining this event today. My name is Eric Kalman, and I'm the Director of Records Management and Information Practices here at UC Merced. And joining me here is Jordan Thaw, Records Analyst, also from UC Merced. So this presentation is really going to look at how we define digital collaboration tools. We'll review some of the more popular tools in use across the UC system, identify some usage and adoption trends, and then see how digital collaboration tools impact records management. And then we'll close with a few best practices that you can take back and implement on your campuses. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in here. So what are digital collaboration tools? Well, collaboration isn't new, right? I mean, we've always collaborated, but the way in which we collaborate has definitely changed over time. Particularly, we adopted this technology in response to the pandemic, as many of us, transitioned from primarily in-person work to, hybrid or fully remote work modalities. We needed tools to collaborate while we were dispersed across these different environments, and these tools were really the answer. Gone are the days of printing several drafts of reports and then sending those out for handwritten comments. Thank goodness. Today collaboration may mean working on a presentation with someone on a different campus while simultaneously communicating in real time through Teams or the actual Microsoft application. So it really makes defining collaboration tools difficult, right? Because really any digital tool or application nowadays will have some form of collaboration functionality. But for this presentation today, we're going to look at collaboration tools as any application or software program that allows individuals, teams, and or groups to work productively together. So I think it's important as we continue to mention these tools that you have, kind of realize what they may be. So I've included these here. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. It's just kind of the ones that I'm more familiar with here at UC Merced and other campuses as well. And I've broken these up into different functions for which we typically leverage these tools, starting with document collaboration. And this can be the entire Microsoft Office 365 suite if you're a Microsoft campus. And then if you're a Google campus, you're probably in Google Workspace using Google Apps. And then, of course, Box as well. And then we have video conferencing. That includes Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meetings. And then file sharing, that's OneDrive, Google Drive, Box, SharePoint, and I know some folks out there also use Dropbox. And then probably the most popular digital collaboration tool of the last 20 plus years is email. And that's typically Microsoft Outlook or Exchange or Gmail if you're at Google Campus. And then, of course, we have our chat and instant messaging platforms like Teams, Google Chat, and Slack. So what does this all mean? Well, setting the stage. I've included some nationwide data trends here that look at collaboration tool adoption, particularly in response to the pandemic. And the numbers are really quite staggering. Collaboration tool usage. 80% of workers use collaboration tools as of 2021. That's up from just over half of employees in 2019. From 2019 to 2021, Zoom absolutely exploded. Right? Today, Zoom has approximately 300 million daily meeting participants. That's up from 10 million in 2019. And then Microsoft Teams usage. Time spent in Teams has more than doubled since the pandemic. And then email delivered to commercial and education customers between February 2020, when compared to February 2021, is up by 40.6 billion. I mean, that number is huge. And then I think everyone can relate to this one here, meeting modalities. Prior to 2020, 63% of meetings were conducted in person. That number has dropped to 33% by 2021. So what does this really mean? Well, based on our use of digital collaboration tools here at Merced, and I'm sure on your campuses as well, we really adopted these in response to the changes in the way we work, right? And I think it's safe to say that our usage and adoption of these tools mirrors that of this nationwide data on this slide. I mean, definitely not to the magnitude of some of these numbers, but the overall adoption trends are very similar. And I think as we continue to use more and more of these tools, it's important to understand the unique challenges, the unique records management challenges that these tools present. For starters, it starts with identification. You must be able to identify from the onset if you're creating or maintaining records in collaboration tools. And this really begins with a solid understanding of what is considered a record according to UC policy. And Jordan will touch on this a little bit later on in the presentation. You may have a difficult time finding records. Records left in collaboration tools may not be classified or filed correctly or even at all. And they may be missed when responding to, California Public Records Act requests or other legal requests like subpoenas, thereby opening us up to really unnecessary risk. And then we have inter-campus access. Like as I mentioned earlier, some campuses use Google, some campuses are Microsoft campuses. And this creates an access problem, right? Because campuses who may be Office 365 may not be able to access Google Workspaces to collaborate on documents. I mean, sure, I could log in with my personal Gmail account, but we don't use personal accounts for university business. That's a big no-no. So what I typically do is just contact the owner of the document, have them share it with me via email. I'll add my comments and then return it back to them. And then lastly, retention and disposition. Applying retention and disposition requirements to records created within these tools is difficult, right? Because these tools were never created or developed to be record repositories. And as a result, they often lack out-of-the-box retention controls, which is why it's important when we identify these tools or identify records within these tools, we export those records into an approved record-keeping system. Now, I know Microsoft has actually done a lot of work on this, on their compliance suite and dashboards on the back end, whereby you can actually establish retention rules for specific content types and then push those rules out to different Microsoft applications. It may be an additional fee to turn this feature on, but it definitely does exist. I'm going to hand this off to Jordan, and she is going to talk a little bit about what is considered a record and what our responsibilities are if we identify records in collaboration tools. Jordan?
Thanks, Eric. So in order to fully grasp the previously mentioned records management risks associated with digital collaboration tools, it's critically important to understand what a record is. According to RMP 1, a record is any writing, regardless of physical form or characteristics, containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business, prepared, owned, used, or maintained by an operating unit or employee of the university. Given this definition, it's very likely that records are created or stored in digital collaboration tools. Think about how you create, use, and share records on a daily basis. You may distribute meeting minutes and agendas via email, send an agreement in Teams to collect a signature, or collaborate on a presentation in Box. Another record found in collaboration tools that may surprise you is asking for an approval via email or whichever platform you use for instant messaging. These conversations are evidence of a business decision and are considered a university record, which must be preserved. I'd like for you to think about the significance of this and what your records management responsibilities are. Many of you may know that each UC campus has a records management coordinator, but did you know that here at UC, we're all records managers? We all share the responsibility to ensure the records we create or receive are preserved and maintained in accordance with appropriate laws and UC policies. If there are conversations or documents created in collaboration tools that contain evidence or actions of business decisions or transactions, they must be managed as university records. So what does that mean for you? Some records management best practices that we recommend include awareness, having a plan, leveraging retention tools, and asking questions. It all starts with awareness. So what does awareness mean? It means we must have a good understanding of what is considered a record and be aware of what documents and our records you're creating within digital collaboration tools. The system-wide records management policies are a great resource for you to consult if you're unsure what to do about your records. Next is having a plan. If you identify records within a collaboration tool, clarify ownership and plan to export the records to an approved records management system. Although collaboration tools are one of the more important applications we use across the UC system, it's important to remember that digital collaboration tools were not built to be a records repository, which means any records identified in these applications must be routinely exported to an approved records management system. It's important to understand that you have options. Some of these collaboration tools have out-of-the-box retention tools that your local records management coordinator can discuss with you. I encourage you to think about the types of records your unit creates and how you maintain and share these records. Your local records management coordinators are there to answer any questions you may have and offer help and guidance. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, that brings us to the end of our presentation. We'd like to thank you for your time and attention today, and we hope to see you at next year's Electronic Records Day.
I think it's back over to Matt.
Start my video here. All right. Thank you. Now, our next presenter, we owe a debt of gratitude to because she has graciously agreed to fill in at the last minute. Our original speaker, Kent Wada, unfortunately had a family emergency and is not able to join us today. So instead, to talk to us about privacy, we have Thea Bullock, UC Irvine campus privacy official. She's been with UT Irvine since 2018, came to Irvine after 26 years of local government experience in environmental health, hazardous materials, public health, administration, healthcare compliance, HIPAA privacy, policy and planning, community service, and public records. Thea was previously the Chief Compliance Officer and Privacy Officer for the County of Orange. And I have not seen her presentation yet, so I'm eagerly looking forward to it. So Thea, you can share your screen, please.
Good morning, everyone. Are you able to see my screen, panelists?
Yes, yes,
Oh.
yes.
So I'm Thea Bullock, joining you from Irvine on a digital collaboration tool. So it's nice to be here, and let me start advancing. So these tools are fantastic. They let us work anywhere with people anywhere. We can easily share documents and we communicate quickly. But what do privacy officers think about when we are using these tools? And this is what I want you to take some time to think about with me this morning, because we think and look at things differently, because we can work with people nearly anywhere. But what does that mean? And what are the implications for us? So, am I working with somebody in another jurisdiction or another state? You know, different states have different privacy laws. Am I working with somebody across an international border? Now, we know different countries have different privacy laws. And when I started my meeting and told people we are going to record, is that adequate consent for everyone in the UC? Probably. Is that adequate consent if I have somebody participating from Europe? Maybe, or maybe not. So that's something to think about while we're using these tools. And then we have to think about, when we're working, what laws could apply. And other things that we worry about, privacy officers by nature tend to worry and think about things that maybe when you start a collaboration you don't consider, but we would consider. Is this particular tool, vendor, or contract appropriately rated for what I'm doing? And am I sharing documents that results in a transnational transfer of data? Did I just send data to another country? And what kind of data was that? Am I okay with sending that to another country? So then there's the documents. We put documents in and we control access to the documents. Privacy officials will ask you to really think about who is in control. So this builds on what Eric and Jordan talked about, that you really need to have a plan before you start the collaboration. It's important for us to know what type of information we are going to share and who controls access to the document. For example, if we are discussing something that has attorney-client privilege and somebody adds a collaborator who is not part of the UC, they are now an outsider and we've waived privilege. So that's something to consider when you're using these tools. Who has access, who controls it, and when you set up the rules, it's better from a privacy point of view to be a little more restrictive and really define who can upload, who can change, who can share, and keep the numbers low and control the access. Establish ground rules when you start the collaboration and think about, is any of the information going to require protections? So we use the IS3 protection levels because that's something that spans our organizations, but is the tool I'm using rated for P3 or P4? Or is this tool so open that I should only be using it for information that's P1 or P2 level? And definitely remember those retention rules. So I won't talk any more about that because Eric and Jordan covered that. And I think it's important that the team is aware that the communications can be disclosed in public records requests, and people need to be thoughtful and mindful of that, and whether or not they're disclosing confidential information. So that leads me into the chats. So in the chats, every one of us should also be mindful of the tone of our messages because they can be read by third parties. And even if we have short retentions set on our chats, people can take screen captures. So if you write something in a chat, be prepared for that to show up again somewhere. It could show up in a lawsuit, it could show up in a deposition, and it could show up in a records request. And I think sometimes people are so comfortable in their teams, they chat a little bit too much, and the chats could include a lot of personal information that's not work related, but it is now captured in our collaboration tool. So be mindful and thoughtful and consider whether or not after a quick chat, checking in with your colleagues on their family, that you may consider deleting the comments that are about the family so that they don't sit in our collaboration tools. And that's something a privacy officer would think about. So all these worries of ours are not to deter you from using collaboration tools, but it's just to create that awareness. And the awareness is the same thing that Eric and Jordan talked to you about. So let's be aware. So we want to classify the record. We know if we're talking about sensitive data or if we have the safeguards in place. Definitely know your retention period before you create records, and provide notices so that everybody on your team, everybody joining your work group, they know the rules. And if somebody does not want to be recorded, they have the option of participating on your meeting, but with their camera off, or be mindful of whether or not they want to submit their questions on a recorded meeting. And so the other thing for people on these video conferencing tools is we ask people to be mindful of their environment to avoid unintentional disclosures. And I'll talk about that more later. And definitely going back to establish roles and permissions, and do not allow everyone to add collaborators. Manage those access, read, or edit permissions periodically. That's important from a privacy point of view. And here's the last one. People don't like to talk about it, but as a former compliance officer, it is something that I'm used to thinking about. We know all the benefits of these tools, and we know how they can be used to change the way we work, but they can also be misused. And you have to do a little bit of planning and thinking about it. Be aware. You have to scan and monitor for misconduct. You look for unauthorized access. We need to find if the chats become hostile or there's bullying conduct. We need to identify that and address that issue, and definitely prevent those unauthorized disclosures or things we didn't intend. So here are some practical tips. Before you join that meeting, look around. Where are you Zooming in from or Skyping in from? Who can hear you? If you're working from home, are you near an open window? Can the neighbors hear you? Are there family members nearby? Is your family member also on a Zoom? So can they hear your meeting, or their collaborators hear what you're talking about? Can passersby hear your conversation? Hopefully you are not Zooming in from public places like a cafe, but it is possible that you take a call at the airport. Make sure you find an area that's away from other people where you're less likely to be overheard. And what can hear you is something that we talked about at the beginning of the pandemic. People need to pay attention to devices, your home assistant, smartwatch, phone, Ring camera, baby monitor. What we don't want to do is accidentally broadcast our meeting over a smart device to somebody we didn't intend. And we did have a colleague that mentioned that they learned they had to turn off their iPhone when they had a meeting with their student employee who had the first name Siri. Okay, and next, before you open that document, before you work on that collaboration tool, it's the same thing. Look at who can see you. Who is looking at you? Who can see your screen? Can people walk behind you? Do you have confidential documents where people can see? Check your environment. And the other reason this is important is if people can see your screen and they can look over your shoulder, there are times that they may see you enter your password. And so that's another privacy and security risk we want you to be mindful of so that you can be careful. You also don't want to have confidential documents out where others can see it. Check your environment. And in addition to the who, we are concerned with the what. There are nanny cams, Wi-Fi cameras, and other things, and consumer surveillance items that might be able to see what you're looking at and may be able to record the document that you're working on. So think about that before we open our laptops and we start working away. So These privacy thoughts are just to make sure that while you're using these tools and while we're working in this new way, that you really get the most out of these collaboration tools without accidental data leakage, and just be mindful of these things when you embrace these tools and use them. So definitely give it some thought before you log in. And thank you for allowing me to join you today.
Okay, so at this time we do have the Q&A option open. You can participate, or attendees should be able to see the Q&A window. So if you have any questions, feel free to start typing them in that Q&A and we will answer them in the order they're received.
And while we're waiting for a question, this is Lori Slatton. I'm the lead of the UC Records Management Committee. And I just want to thank the committee for providing us this forum, and also the work group that put it all together. I want to thank them for their help and assistance, and obviously the speakers who have been wonderful. So thank you very much for all of your input and efforts.
It looks like we got one question so far. Oh, here they come. The question is there a list that defines which campuses are Google versus Microsoft?
So I don't know off the top of my head. I know Merced, we are a Microsoft campus. I don't know if any of the other presenters, I'm sure it's out there somewhere, know which campuses are Google and which are Microsoft.
We have another question. The presenter mentioned levels of privacy information, P1, P2, P3. I think that was you, Thea. Where can we find more information about those categories?
That's in the IS3 system-wide policy, and we'll go find a link to that policy.
Okay. We have another question that has come in. What considerations are important when applying records management policy governance across all of these collaboration platforms?
Well, I think you got to start with the record type, right? Because the content of a record determines its retention, and retention is a big part of governance. So I think it starts there, and you can always reach out to your records management coordinator. Each campus has one, and they can provide additional information.
Eric. Next question is, is there a recommended system-wide electronic platform for personal files?
Personnel.
Thank
I
you.
do not think so. Lori, do you have the answer to that one? I think each campus uses a different system.
Sorry, I was looking for the link, so I didn't actually hear the question.
Is there a recommended system-wide electronic platform for personnel files?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Next one is just a response. UCSB is a Google campus. Next question, are there certain records that are so important that they need to be kept in both physical and digital form?
Sure. We have what we call vital records, and those would meet that definition there, that they are so vital that we need to keep them. It could be in two different formats to ensure their preservation if there is any sort of business continuity issues and we needed to access those immediately.
Can you give a couple examples of what would be a vital record?
Sure. So the first one that comes off the top of my head is, building plans, design and construction. It could be personnel files. Those are the two that come to mind immediately. Jordan, Lori, do you have any other examples you would like to include?
Well, there's all kinds of things that could be vital records. It's all dealing with what do we need to have with us in case there is some kind of disaster that occurs, whether it's a small one like your computer crashes, or if it's a large one where we have a complete system failure. What would you need to be able to resume the business of the university that is critical? Like payroll records would be one. The financial records that show who we owe money to and
Ledgers,
who owes us
yeah.
money.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things, but also there are other things that need to be kept in physical format, and it's all based on there are some laws that deal with what we can do electronically and what we can't. And there's the first one is the E-Sign Act, which was signed by President Clinton, that says we can conduct business electronically and it'll have the same meaning as being in hard copy or paper format. And then each state passed something that was a uniform act. It's called UETA, Uniform Electronic Transaction Act. And in that act for California, there are a whole list of exclusions. So if you're interested in looking at that, look up California UETA and you'll be able to come up with that law, and you'll see some of the exclusions. Things like promissory notes are in there, things where we have conducted the business on paper where we still need to keep that. And there's also federal agencies that require us to do certain things in order to accept electronic records. The FDA is one of them. They don't call it INS anymore, so we can't Customs and Borders people dealing with the I-9s. So there's all kinds of things. So if you have specific questions, you might look at that UETA for California.
Got it. Thank you, Lori. The next question is there a recommended cross-platform solution to apply policy/categorization to content regardless of its source?
Not sure.
Yeah.
I don't really know if I understand the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I was going to ask that whoever had submitted that if they could give me a little more detail in the Q&A on that one, on what they were looking for. In the meantime, is security level P1, P2, etc., a UCOP level designation or a campus level designation? I.e., will data types have the same security level across all campuses?
This is definitely a system-wide policy and classification. So your protection level 1 will be public information. Anyone can have access to it. Protection level 2 may be institutional information, generally not intended for public use or access, but you want to have some protections over who can see it. Protection level 3, that is where we have some legal requirements to protect it. And if we don't protect the data, then it could be subject to breach notice requirements, and it could be fines and penalties. Protection level 4, that's the super confidential things that we have large responsibility to safeguard and protect, and we need to have a lot of controls in place. And so that's in a system-wide policy, and it's under, I think, the information security side of things, but it is consistent, and it should be the common language that we all use when we classify that data.
I'm going to use that question to type in the URL for more information about the classification of records on that P level, which is the protection level, and then there's also the access level. So here's a website that might be helpful to people. Hopefully it shows up.
Okay. Thank you, Thea. Thank you, Lori. We got another one. Oh, it's more kudos. Great presentation. I have something. Okay, so a couple of questions on this one. We'll start with the first one. How do we as an organization, the UC, enforce/remind people about security on an ongoing basis? Do we track our score today in terms of awareness of privacy best practices?
It's a very good question, and it's hard to answer because we are such a large entity across 10 campuses and labs and things like that. Do we have a score? No. But would we like to? All the privacy officials would love to have that. And that's one of the goals. But the effort to enforce is not as strong as the effort to educate. Because my campus is 23,000 people working, creating records, accessing records. There is no way to enforce our way into privacy protections. The best way is to educate, get people aware, and to make it easy for people to safeguard information.
And I think our information security people on a daily basis are trying to come up with ways to help educate and help us monitor our systems to make sure that they are compliant. There's all kinds of assessments that go on different systems to make sure that that happens. One of the things that we use is that SSO, our dual authentication process, to make sure that the people that can get in are authenticated as the people that they say they are. I think we all have that at each one of our locations.
All right, thanks, Thea and Lori. Another question. This is going to be you again, I think, Thea. How do we balance need to know and academic spirit of collaboration sharing and freely disseminating information?
So the person that posed the question used the magic word, balance. It's always a balance test when it comes to privacy. So a privacy official will tell you to make sure that we have notice, consent, and that we have the authority to share. So when we collected that information or data from the individual, so I collected Eric's information. At the time of collection, I have his consent, and then I provided him notice. This is what I'm going to do with it. This is what who I'm going to share, and how I'm going to protect it, and how long I'm keeping it. So I have his consent, I have notice, and then if I have all of that, then the sharing for learning and research, if it's covered under those, and I have his permission, I can do that. If I don't have his permission and I want to share his information, I have to go back and ask. Or I can strip out most of the identifiers so that you can't tell it's Eric's information, and a de-identified information that can be shared more easily. So there's a lot of different ways to balance it. But if you ask a privacy official, we will say, respect that individual, that person, and their wishes. And if we can't show that we have their permission, and that we can't show that we told them that this is what the UC does with your information, then be very careful and maybe look for an alternative way. And so that's where the balance comes in. But usually, if you have a well thought out project or use, there is a way to balance the public good of doing this research and learning this wonderful new thing or creating a new tool, and the rights of the individual. So it's going to be a balance.
Thanks, Thea. I think the next one's going to kind of follow up on that. As a public institution, I imagine we are mandated to share information. Is this a compromise in terms of security and privacy? How do we balance these needs?
So I think this comes up most often in our status as a public entity when we deal with our vendors, because under the Public Records Act, as Jordan mentioned, the public has a right to access any writing we use to conduct our business. Now, if a vendor has a contract with a private university, public doesn't get to say, hey, can I see your contracts? And can I see your terms and how much you're paying for this service? And in this case, as a public entity, we have to comply. It's an obligation. Public has a right to see. So it is tough for us sometimes. And it is a compromise for a lot of our vendors. And sometimes they're unhappy about that. But we plan for it in advance We let the vendors know when they bid that we're a public institution. We should put in standard terms and conditions. Hey, your contract can be requested and disclosed so that they know, and they have to flag their trade secrets. If they flag their trade secrets, we don't give them out. But that's where we need to plan ahead. And I definitely think that the plans and the advice that Eric and Jordan put in their presentation is the way to make it easy to balance. So all of these things fit together.
Excellent. Thanks, Thea. Okay, so we have more information on the earlier question about the cross-platform. So that question was, is there a recommended cross-platform solution to apply policy categorization to content regardless of its source? And so if I have and to follow up with that, if I have a content across M365, SharePoint, Teams, etc., but I also have content outside of Microsoft, as is example in line of business systems, where there's, for example, no government options within, or file shares or other sources, is there a tool where I can apply governance centrally while keeping the information at its source?
Not that I know of. I mean, that would make our jobs as records management coordinators really easy if there was. I think that's really important. That's why it's important to understand kind of your responsibilities, because you, for lack of a better term, kind of the first line of compliance when you're looking at where your records are stored and what those capabilities of those systems are in terms of retention controls. So that may be a long-winded answer, but to answer your question, not that I know of, there is no way to apply those rules centrally to several different systems. But as I mentioned in the presentation, Microsoft has been doing a lot of work. So if you have records that are in the Microsoft kind of ecosystem, you can develop retention rules and then push those out to those applications.
I think there's some companies that have been working on a cross federation of being able to apply retention, but I don't think any of them are as sophisticated as they need to be at this point to actually do it. And I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, last one. It's a good one. Thanks, Lori and Eric. I speak with prospective students from all over the world via Zoom. Is there an available list of countries that I can review for additional security precautions, or is this not needed?
It's challenging to get a comprehensive list. Talk to your local privacy official. There are certain countries that are a lot riskier for the student to participate with us. They don't have the same rights. So contact your campus privacy official. The rules are pretty different. And we've had to address some of this in our campus in helping people set up, for instance, logins when they're an international student, but they're coming from a country that our vendors are not allowed to do business in. So definitely it does happen. And it's a case by case. It's not an easy tool or list, sorry.
All right, thanks, Thea. I believe it is, I can't see my 11 o'clock.
Yeah, it's 11 o'clock. So that's a nice binary time to end also. If we end by 11:01, that'll also make it. But if we go over to 11:02, then we're pushing it. So thank you for joining us, everyone. We did record the session. It will be posted. We just need to get the closed caption on it. And yes, thank you.